Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's info session on managing data privacy, consent, and compliance. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. So hang tight while a few more people join and we'll get started. Right. I'm a believer in rewarding those who are on time. So let's get started with today's session. My name is Jeff Sechrist, and I run the product and product marketing and product management teams at Lytics. I'm here today with Nick Brooks and Shane Hartman, who are on our client team, working closely in the, with probably a lot of you on the call here on a lot of different topics. But I'm happy to have them here today to help address this important topic around compliance, consent, and privacy. I know Nick and Shane, you get brought into a lot of customer meetings to talk about these issues because it's an important topic for customers today. So anyway, this is what we're going to go through, a little bit of just talking about why this is important, getting into some architecture, how to reach customers in privacy compliant ways. And then we'll, as we get through this, we'll also touch a little bit on some things that are coming at Lytics. We've got some new features and new capabilities that we're going to be rolling out soon. So excited to share some of that with you today as well. We'll save time at the end for Q&A, but please feel free to use the questions, the Q&A menu here on Zoom, and submit your questions that way. We may be able to respond with a written response or address them live as we get to the end, but it'll at least give us a sense of the types of questions and things that are coming in along the way. So all right, with that, why don't we jump in and get started. So the clients that we work with today, many are engaged in essentially a digital transformation, and they're thinking about how to leverage data globally. And for customers, that's become more and more challenging. I think the move away from third-party approaches around identity and around the use of data for marketing has shifted the way that companies need to approach how they make most and best use of the data that they already have, which is the first-party data that the company already owns, to be able to harness that and leverage that in a way that that helps advance the business, but also is respectful of the emerging security and privacy issues that are so prevalent and so variant, I guess, in different regions across the world. So this, is in some ways just getting started as new regions pick up new emerging regulations. From our perspective, though, consent is one of the first use cases, in some cases, the most important use cases for marketers. If you aren't confident that the data that you're using to build your campaigns around is built upon a foundation of consent, it becomes very challenging to effectively build campaigns. And so, knowing that you're built on a consent-based foundation is critical to your success. And that's a bit of what we're going to spend some time talking about today. But this is a multi-pronged issue as well, with some of the new privacy regulations, even addressing data residency and where data is to be held. So your ability to manage within this kind of ever-changing environment, is important to be working with partners where this is, a focus. And for us at Lytics, we are a compliance based a CDP, and so we want to share some of that with you today. It's not even just the sort of regional side of things, because, it used to be Europe, right, and North America. And now within Europe, you've got regions like Germany and Italy sort of flexing their own muscles around what they want around privacy. And you've got California, and then you've got what Gartner here's called the CCPA effect, where more and more regions are starting to create some of their own regulations. And so navigating within this kind of environment requires, I think, customers to take a really strong look at how they're managing their customer data to ensure that they're operating in a way that's compliant with regulations and best practices. So here at Lytics, we have a variety of measures on the security and data protection front, which you can look at there. So we take, of course, security and data protection overall very seriously, but from a privacy perspective around consent management, where we'll spend some time today, data residency, as I mentioned, a lot of capabilities here for regional support. And then we also, if you're really keenly focused around privacy, security, and have a need to yet share data with other regions, divisions, partners in ways that are privacy friendly and privacy centric, Lytics also has a clean room solution that can help you to securely share that data with your partners without disclosing PII. So anyway, a lot in the Lytics umbrella to kind of support some of this. But again, the folks who are in the field helping customers address these issues every day are my colleagues joining me today, Shane Hartman and Nick Brooks, and they're going to take you through some of this. But before we pivot there, I'd like to spend just a second and show you one of our new features that we're going to be releasing soon, which is tied to our topic today. We call it Lytics Vault. And so Vault is a new hub for all of the security and privacy related features that you will already have available within Lytics, and that will continue to expand and roll out. So things such as user controls and authorizations, the management of tokens. Today, some of these things happen within the individual Lytics products, and as Lytics has grown and introduced a more multi-product approach, what Vault has allowed us to do is to create a layer that exists for these security and privacy oriented features that sits outside of the individual product applications and sits at the account level overall. And so that's what you are seeing here with Vault. I'll just drop out of the presentation real briefly here and go over to our beta environment. So you won't be able to see this just yet in your beta environment, but quite soon, and we'll send you an email notification when that is available. You'll see Vault as an option here within the upper left-hand navigation, where you see the other components of that make up your Lytics solution. And then, at least in its initial iteration here, what you'll see are several things that you've seen in other areas of the application that we've now stripped out of those, brought into this new hub for all things sort of security and privacy oriented. So so you'll see all those menu items here. You'll be able to take a look here for a brief period in beta before it shows up in production. You don't need to do anything for this to be rolled out into production. There's nothing that's going to break. There's mostly just changes to where you'll find things initially. But it's an important foundational release for us because it gives us a way to enhance these things as we move forward. So with that as our intro, I'd like to pivot back to our topics of management of consent and turn it over to Shane.
Hey everyone, I'm excited to share with you a little bit high level about how we think about consent architecture and privacy here at Lytics, and how we'd like to partner with our customers to help provide that best practice in terms of architecture as well. You can go to the next slide, please. Talk about consent. Kind of all begins with that first client interaction, which is usually client side. So either in the browser or in a mobile app or something. And some best practices that we want to be mindful of are we always want to get that consent, upfront and first. Once we have that interaction, we want to be clear, what we're asking for from our consumer. If it's a browser situation, on site, we want to make that ask clear about accepting cookies. If it's in an app, you want to ask about granting permission for tracking an app. And then once that consent's granted, then, it's okay to go ahead and, fire that tag or begin tracking an app. So it's kind of the order of operations is to first secure the consent, and before any of the Lytics SDK even gets loaded or any of your other SDKs. We can move to the next slide. On the browser side, there's a couple of ways to manage consent. You can use like a simplified approach where you can set up like a custom tag in GTM. You can set up like a watcher tag that's wired up to a cookie so that you can prompt the consumer for consent before that cookie even gets dropped, and then before the Lytics SDK loads in the browser. Most of our customers are using a more sophisticated approach. They're using like a tag manager in tandem with the consent management platform. And recently, Google's launched a new consent module. So a number of the CMPs actually have direct integrations with Google's consent module. And this allows like a lot of streamlined, like kind of pre-wired connection between the way that the tag, your tags fire and the way that consent's managed in the CMP. In the right there, you can see that there's a lot of flexibility that Google offers in the consent module. The baseline is you can have a trigger set up for consent initialization, and this will fire on all pages. And then layered on top of that, for every tag that you wire up, let's say for the Lytics tag, or maybe it's for a special campaign, there are 3 options on top of that default consent initialization trigger, where you can add another layer of consent. And you can see there's an option to just leave the default approach or to require additional consent. And the default is just to not set. We really want to be sure to partner with our customers to kind of meet you where you are, whether you're using a simplified approach like the one outlined on the left, or you have a more sophisticated setup with a CMP. You can leverage the Lytics SDK using whatever approach works best, for your stack. And then if we move on to mobile, recently Lytics launched a mobile SDK both for iOS and Android, and consent works a little bit different on mobile. With the SDK, whether it's on iOS or on Android, generally you want to secure that consent upfront, so before the SDK even gets loaded. And in iOS, you can do this in what's called an app delegate. And in Android, you would do this using like a subclass of the Android application class. I think it's important to call out that this whole thing around device ID and the consumer granting permission to use like their IDFA or the Google Ad ID is separate from like the regulatory framework for consent. With the Lytics SDK, like let's say that a user does not grant ad permission on iOS, the Lytics SDK can still be loaded, but let's say you're in a GDPR area where you need that opt-in, you'd want to go ahead and do that upfront when the SDK is in the app are getting initialized. I can just share my screen really quick. We won't go too deep into code, but this is the initialization call for the Lytics SDK and Android. And you can see that this is just a subclass of the application class. You've got some config parameters here, and then the Lytics and init call. And with both iOS and Android, the default for a consumer with the Lytics SDK is an opt-in. So if you're in a GDPR region, I'll just uncomment this, you would go ahead and initialize the SDK and then call that opt-out function, because you need to secure that consent before you actually load the SDK. On iOS, this is all done in the app delegate, and you actually would just not even call this initialization method at all unless you got that consent. We won't go too far into the weeds there, but if you want more information, we do have a lot of more specifics for both SDKs and our docs.lytics.com platform under privacy consent section and that right menu over here. And I'll stop sharing.
Great. So yeah, both web and mobile SDKs have ways to establish opt-out status, which helps ensure that the right data, that consent-based data, is what's being collected. Let's see, I'm trying to get back to the presentation here. Where did it go? Sorry. Where did it go? It's on this other window here. Oh, wait a minute. There we go.
While Jeff's loading that, just another quick note with iOS and Android. Under the ATT, or the App Transparency Tracking Framework, that IDFA is automatically not available. And most folks already know this, but with Google, it is. The Lytics SDK actually has some helper functions as well to help you go ahead and call that permissioning and get that on screen in app, so you can get that consent for that device ID. We can move to the next slide.
Okay.
There's a lot of flexibility with consent management and Lytics. You can go ahead and get those opt-ins like at a campaign by campaign level using like a web form or cookie banner, any kind of interaction that you want. And you can configure logic either in app or using like jstag.send method on the Lytics tag to go ahead and send that consent event over to us. It's really up to you, like how you want to structure consent. There's also a lot of flexibility with Conductor and the way that you're able to segment or create audiences around consent. So if we move to the next slide, you can get, really precise here in terms of like, what privacy policy did a user grant? When will that consent expire? And all of this schema and these attributes, a lot of it actually just comes out of the box in Conductor. And this way, it's kind of like having like a backstop or a second source of truth to make sure that, not only are you complying, but you're making sure to put the consumer or the user in charge of their own privacy. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Nick.
Thanks, Shane. We can go ahead and switch to the next slide. So I want to talk to you guys about how we can continue to reach our customers in privacy compliant ways with all of these regulations that are now in effect and applicable to our environments. And specifically, I'm going to focus in a little bit farther down the customer journey. So after our anonymous customers have been on site and maybe opted in to more of a channel consent to a preference to be communicated on a specific channel. So commonly we see this with email newsletters, where when you're signing up for an account, you can opt in for those email communications. And SMS is another channel that we commonly see applied in the similar ways, where opting in to the channel that you'll be communicated with is important. For the enterprise strategy, though, for our larger customers, we see a lot of benefit and a lot of advantages for being purposeful about how that consent is being collected. So rather than just collecting it at a base level for the specific promotion or for the specific brand that's being signed up for, larger enterprises are commonly collecting that consent so that it can be used for cross-promotional campaigns and cross-brand campaigns as well. It's not just about getting the ability to reach that customer through that email address or that phone number they provided now, but also in expanding your ability to continue to have more at-bats and get engagements with that client and get more communications that can help target the messages that they'll receive. And when you're thinking about the channels that will be collecting consent strategy or consent for, that people will be opting in for, it can be very helpful to not just think about the current channels that are being used for the campaigns like email or SMS notifications, but also think about future channels that you may start to use with future campaigns. If you're expanding into push notifications or in-app notifications, collecting consent for those additional channels early on can help prioritize campaigns in terms of knowing what the reach will be and what the impact of developing more campaigns in those channels. So we can go on to the next slide here. And having those different channel ops is very powerful for expanding the reach for the campaigns that you are running. You don't have to just reach the person in the single channel that has traditionally been used, but using things like goals and journeys through Lytics, you can continue to use the same audiences of engaged users and re-engage on the channels where they do have a preference for being communicated in. So, if you're doing product announcements, don't just think about having to announce that via email, but think about additional ways of using push notifications through browsers, in-app notifications, modals on site, wherever the consumer has indicated that they do like to be communicated with to engage their interests. So, and go on to the next slide here. And beyond the kind of cross-promotional campaign and cross-channel campaigning approach that there's also a huge operational impact of the GDPR and CCPA type policies on the teams that support these systems. So we can go to the next slide here. So with GDPR and CCPA, consumers have been given additional rights for things like data erasure requests and data access requests. Consumers now have the ability to request that companies will delete their data or provide reports on what data is being used for marketing campaigns and for other targeting purposes. When these types of processes that are now being prepared for consumers are not handled correctly, it can be extremely expensive. Facebook has had large fines in EU. Many other companies have had large, costly fines as well. And it undermines customer trust when people are not able to have their privacy respected as they would hope. So we can go to the next slide. Now, Lytics has a number of ways that support the regulations and the requirements that GDPR and CCPA have set out. In the UI, there's a manual approach for downloading profiles for returning those to consumers. There's the ability to comply with the right to erasure requests and delete the data that exists about a profile. But we also see in enterprise strategy more of an automation approach being taken to handle these types of requests as well. So if we go on to the next slide here. It's a best practice across the board to use things like the Lytics APIs to help manage those requests that are being received. Especially with systems that are being used to comply with these privacy requirements like OneTrust and other data subject request automation systems. It can be very helpful to reduce the complex and manual approach that's needed to delete data from many different systems and download it from different places. Using the unified profile that exists in Lytics to access that data, using the APIs that exist with Lytics to delete those profiles is very powerful and helpful to automate that. And as a real world example for why this is kind of important, Reddit, a big social media aggregator, has recently been having protests over some of its moderation policies. There's been subreddits built up in protest that are actually submitting large amounts of CCPA requests to Reddit that then Reddit has to comply with or pay fines and penalties. So having automation and approaches that can help handle these requirements at scale is going to be a best practice for as these types of requirements become more common across the world. And all this is everything we're talking about here is about how we can continue to help manage and orchestrate what you're doing with Lytics more effectively. I'll pass it off over here to Jeff for what we'll be doing with some audience management as well.
Great, yeah, thanks. All right, so before I pivot over to audience groups, what I'd like to remind you, if you have questions on the compliance, privacy topics, anything along those lines, drop them into the Q&A. Actually, if you have questions about anything, drop them into the Q&A. We're monitoring that here, and we'll get to the Q&A section in just a moment here. But before we do that, I wanted to take a moment and talk about another new functionality enhancement that we're going to be releasing soon, and that is around audience groups. So those of you who are power users of Lytics have probably all been seeking some version of this feature for a while, so we're happy to be able to bring this forward. I think the more mature that customers get in their use of Lytics, and the more growth that they see in the number of audiences that they have available, the more this feature becomes important to help take a list of of audiences and instead allow you to organize those into groups, so that you can have different audiences for different regions. You can have different audiences for for different brands. One of the things we've customers have said is that if without some organization like this, so that a group knows, well, here's my set of segments, they have a hard time getting through the whole list. And because they've now don't have confidence in which audience to use, they often end up creating yet another audience so that it's what they're looking for. And I think in this case here, what this is helping you to organize these things in a way that'll just make it a lot easier for customers to get what they're looking for. So this will show up soon in beta as well, and will be automatically released and made available in your production accounts once all of the testing is complete. Both Vault and audience groups, I mean, these should be fully available to you we're talking about weeks here, not much longer than that. So I don't have specific dates to share with you, but we'll continue to share more details with you as we get closer. All right. Yeah, so let's see. So we'll pivot to some Q&A. You may have noticed a poll also that's showing up for those of you who've been on these sessions each month. Earlier at the start of this year, we said that we wanted to put in place both ongoing communications as well as a forum for us, for the product team and our client support teams, to be able to more regularly interact with our customers. And so we've had these now monthly newsletters. Hopefully you're seeing those come through. We've got these monthly info sessions. We'd love your feedback on other session ideas. So please do complete the poll that you see on the screen. And let's see, and also looking for other questions. Feel free to bring those into the chat, or I'm sorry, into the Q&A window. But if you look at the chat, just for quick business keeping before people start to leave, our next info session next month is going to be focused on experimentation, A/B testing, and optimization. So there's a registration link. Please do register. We love seeing you in these each month, and want to be able to continue to share new enhancements, new ideas, as well as regroup on some best practices on some things that we've had for a while. There's a question about whether the slides will be shared. We will share a recording of this with folks. If you're interested in seeing the slides, just let us know, and I think we can make sure that you get those in a different format as well. But we'll definitely make the recording available for you so you can share it with others in your organization. All right, let's see. So Shane, Nick, did you get a chance to kind of, as you're out working with customers on some of these things, what like you mentioned a couple of things around like the multi-brand support and getting some of that consent up front for, you're trying to establish consent up front for campaigns that you haven't even fully conceived of yet, right? So you see that a lot in multiple brand organizations. Do you see that across regions? Where do you see that playing out most frequently?
Definitely with multi-brand enterprise. Anyone who's got the potential for additional brands to benefit from the first party data you have, what you know about them, what their interests are, what types of products they purchase. That type of information is so great for direct marketing, using for lookalike models, even exporting out to paid media and social media sites for doing lookalike modeling there. So
yeah, and a great way for brands to be able to share those contacts across brands that may support the company's broader initiatives. Great. All right. Well, looks like that is the end of our questions, and so we will let people have some time back in your busy schedules. I appreciate everybody's time today. Shane, thank you for joining us. Nick, thank you for your expertise. Appreciate it. If you have any follow-up questions, please, you can always reach us at product@lytics.com. And we will always see your feedback. So thank you for that. All right, with that, we'll call it a day. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
thanks, everyone.